All right, now that we have an idea of what a chordate is, and the fact of being a chordate just means that you have a notochord at some time of your life, we're ready to move on and look at some of the more traditional vertebrates that we're used to, like you can see in this fossil record here. Quite clearly, that segmentation looks like an organism that was probably a vertebrate from some time in the past. So the first thing we're going to do is go back to our chart so we kind of where we are, and we've moved beyond now having a notochord. Remember the cephalochordates and the urochordates, they all had notochords. But now we moved into the group that we call the craniata, and they call them that because they have a cranium, which means that they have a skull, or at least the beginnings of a skull, or they're starting out. And then of course, as we move down through those groups, we get jaws and lungs and lobe fins, and we'll work our way through all those as we make our way down through this list. So we moved out of the chordates now and into the vertebrates. And the vertebrates that we need to look at now are the things that we call cyclostomes. The jaws is in red here, shouldn't be in red, that's a mistake. But the myxinae and the other group that we're going to look at in a second, the Petromyzontida, those are cyclostomes. And cyclostomes are called that because their mouths are circular shaped. So stome is mouth and cycle is a circular shape. These are circular shaped organisms. These are what we call gnathans, organisms that do not have jaws. This is a hagfish. This is in the group Myxinae. Jawless organisms with a persistent notochord. So that notochord that they have has never been replaced. Remember, ours has been replaced by our intervertebral discs, or the remnants of our notochord. And in the shark the other day, we were looking at the vertebrae of one of the sharks, and that was we could see the notochord there. These animals are scaleless with cartilaginous skeletons, and they do have a skull. They basically live on the bottom, and they use those tentacles in the front to sort of feed on debris that's along the bottom. So they don't need really highly sophisticated sensory organs like brains. They have a small brain. Eyes and ears are much reduced. They do have teeth, not made out of the same materials we are. The teeth are made of keratin. And they produce massive amounts of slime. That's what those slime glands are. And the slime is important because slime on a fish helps protect the fish from microbial infections, or if it gets a cut, it acts as kind of a protectant till it heals. It's also a good way to escape predators and to use it as a lubricant to burrow down in the substrate while you wait for something to unexpectedly swim by. But these are what we call the hagfish or the slime eels. If you're into eel skin wallets, this is what your eel skin wallet is made out of. An eel is actually another type of fish. It's not a hagfish, but those wallets are made, and those wallets and those purses are made out of this stuff. I guess hagfish wallets or slime eel wallets probably just wouldn't sell very well, so they changed them to eel skin. But that's not really an eel. The other member of this round circle group are the Petromyzontida. I have a member of this in the species here in Florida down at the bottom is Petromyzon marinus. It's a saltwater species of lamprey that actually has been moved into the Great Lakes. So it's a lot like the shark that we were looking at the other day. There are some other species that can move between freshwater and saltwater. You can see in the picture on the right, they become invasive as they move their way through the Great Lakes. The reason why they're problematic is if you look in the middle at the round mouth, those rows of keratin teeth are rasping teeth. So what they do is they attach themselves to the fish, like you see in the picture, and they leave a wound, that little circular wound that you see in the picture in the onset there. Still a cartilaginous skeleton, but at least the beginnings of something a little more advanced, I guess, if you want to call it that, a neural arch. If you think about your vertebral column, you got the bony part, and you got the part that goes over the top, and that is the neural arch that protects the nervous cord. Now, ours is made out of bone, but in these organisms, we do start to see a neural arch, although it is made of cartilage. And again, these are the lampreys with a perfectly shaped mouth too, right, on an angle like that, so they can swim up on their unsuspecting. All right, now we're ready to really move on to the jaws. So now we're going to add a mineralized skeleton. So now we're going to take the vertebral column and that notochord, and we're going to reinforce it. We're going to use cartilage in some cases, like in the case of the cartilaginous fishes, especially the sharks. We're going to use bone in other cases, like in amphibians and the reptiles and the other types of fish out there. But this is going to make an organism that's stronger and bigger. And of course, that's going to, again, drive that arms race that we've been talking about here. So we're also moving into the organisms. I'm sorry, folks, I was looking at something. The gnathostomes. So now these are the mouths that have jaws. Gnatho is a jaw. So these are jawed mouths. So we're not just talking about keratin for rasping. We're talking about. So again, the first fish were jawless. These were the agnathids. And an example of those would be the ostracoderms. That's the little blue one in the small little picture there. Cartilaginous skeleton and bottom dwellers. These are the ancestors of the hagfish and the lampreys. The jaws appeared later on in a group of organisms we collectively call the gnathostomes, jaw, mouth. Gnatho is jaw. And when that occurred, of course, it drove the arms race that we've been talking about. And if you can, one of the responses would, some fish begin to armor themselves. Like, for example, the placoderm that's up there in the upper right has got a head shield and a thoracic shield covering the important parts of the body, but it's also got a very strong jaw. So there was that give and take that you would find in a predator-prey relationship. Acanthodians, the ones in the middle, they used a little different technique. They got that big spine on their back that would dissuade any predator from swooping down on top of them. Fish, at this time, we also developed internal gills with a single loop circulatory system, like we talked about in the shark, where it's a two-chambered heart, the ventricle being pumping deoxygenated blood through the gills where it's oxygenated, and then back to the body where it's deoxygenated and back to the heart. About 360 million years ago, there was a mass die-off of fish at the end of the Devonian. The acanthodians stuck around quite a bit longer, actually, to almost the ends of the dinosaurs. But after this big die-off 360 million years ago is when we have the real expansion and diversity among the sharks and the bony fish. And of course, this was all driven, in many cases, by further improvements that were made to the jaw. Okay, now that we've introduced jaws and a vertebrae, we'll turn our attention to the different groups of fishes. I'll take a look at those first, and we'll look at the chondrichthyes, which are the cartilaginous. Of course, cartilage doesn't mean that the skeleton is any less weak. As you guys found out when you were doing your dissections the other day, a cartilaginous skeleton is not a matter of versus bone, but instead of bone. These animals used cartilage to stiffen up their vertebral column and work just as well as bones. They can make very large animals too, like that whale shark over on the right. That's a cartilaginous fish. It's a very light, very strong skeleton, which is good if you're a predator. And these are some of the first fish that developed teeth. And if you remember the other day when we were looking at our dogfish, if you rubbed your hand down one way, it was smooth, and the other way it was rough. It's because if you look under a microscope, that's what the scales look like. They look like little barbs. So we believe that the teeth on modern sharks, right, you see that picture on the right, look very much like those scales, and we think that's probably where teeth came from. They evolved from scales. The teeth are easily lost and continually replaced, which is something that would be very important for a predator, considering they live and die by their teeth. And most of these guys are carnivorous, but the largest ones are suspension feeders, which is an interesting paradox that happens in biology among some of the larger fish, as well as some of the larger mammals like the whales. So these are the sharks and the skates and the rays. There's a stingray, a Florida stingray on the right. There's actually a white spotted bamboo shark in the middle. That's an albino that was born at SeaWorld many years ago. And that's a chimera. Chimera, deep water fish. They have usually very big eyes because there's low light levels down there. And they're just a very odd looking animal, very rarely seen. So the teleray from a skate on the left-hand side is a Florida stingray, and of course they have the sting, the barb that's been pointed to, that's replaced on a regular basis. At SeaWorld, they used to cut them off to protect the tourists when they were in the petting pool, but they eventually grow them back. They use it for defense. Skates, on the other hand, don't have a barb, but they do have fins on their tail, and they do have these rough or bony or thorny protubercles that run down. See where the other arrow is pointing, running down the middle? That skate on the right-hand side is known as the clear nose skate. And then something you can't see from the picture, but is the difference between these two. Stingrays give birth to live young, and skates, on the other hand, lay eggs. There's a really pretty stingray down below in Florida. That's the spotted eagle ray, Etabatus neri neri. And just like with the sharks, there are some really big rays that are filter feeders, like that manta ray in the background. It's using its cephalic folds, those things in the front, to filter water into its mouth, where it gets its food from. Reproduction, internal fertilization using claspers. We saw those on our sharks. I think we had all males. That picture on the right-hand side is obviously one with claspers. Most sharks are viviparous, so there's 3 words here we have to introduce. We might as well get them at this point. Viviparous means you give birth to live young. So human beings are viviparous, and sharks are viviparous. Some species are. Ovoviviparous means you lay eggs. So birds would be ovoviviparous, and reptiles would be oviparous, and many fish would be oviparous. And then there are some organisms that are called ovoviviparous, which is maybe easy to understand if you think about the other word, the aplacental viviparity. So what happens is the young develop inside the mother, but she provides no food or no sustenance for them. So it's basically just a place for them to develop. Sand tigers are known for this. On the bottom right is a picture of a sand tiger. The ones that lay eggs, by the way, lay some very interesting eggs. Those things at the top, those are horn shark egg cases. They're sometimes called mermaid's purses. You might find them on the beach. And the one down below is another horn shark egg case, the one that looks like a spiral. Now, sand tigers, because of this aplacental viviparity, what'll happen sometimes, what happens is inside of the uterus of the shark, the first young pup that grows bigger than everybody else eats all of their brothers. It's called intrauterine cannibalization, or adelophagy, or brother eating. And of course, the question about sharks always comes up about what good are they, but sharks are important for keeping the ecosystem in balance. They're good for taking care of the bait fish and getting rid of the weak and just keeping everything, in the ecosystem balance it's supposed to be in. But the problem with the conservation on sharks is they have a very long gestation period, so it takes a long time to reproduce. And they don't have a lot of offspring. They have relatively few, so they're very sensitive to population declines. And you can see in the graph down below that a lot of them have suffered major decreases in their population. The mako shark, not so much. And the reason why that might be is mako sharks are very open water out in the middle of the ocean. And there's not a lot of human contact or human problems occurring out there in the middle of the ocean, not a lot of habitat destruction. So the next group of fish we want to look at are known as the Actinopterygii, and they're also called, if you look on the right, the osteichthyes. Ichthyes, again, is fish, and chondrichthyes was cartilaginous, and now osteichthyes is bony fish. So the Actinopterygii are bony fish, but more specifically, the Actinopterygii means that they have triangular shaped fins with rays, right? If you think about a shark's fin, like when we did the dissection, they didn't have rays. See the rays in the picture that I'm showing you there? There's a ray-finned fish. These guys evolved along with the sharks, and they use those rays to stiffen the fins, but there are no muscles within the fins at all. It's just an appendage hanging out. There's Gambusia, which is the mosquito fish. That's actually a pregnant female. I can tell by the black dot, but you can see the ray fins on that. Most are oviparous. Guppies actually have internal fertilization. One of the rays on one of the males has been modified and used for internal fertilization. They have a swim bladder, which they use for buoyancy. They can inflate and deflate that swim bladder to rise up and down in the water column. That's something sharks don't have. But if you remember, what sharks did have is they had a big oily liver, which helped. Members of this group also have gill covers or an operculum, right? It pumps gills, it protects the gills, it pumps water, like you see in the shark down below. Sharks don't have an operculum, right? Only the operculum is the bony plate over the top. About 27,000 species of bony fish. Most of them are vertebrates. And that's the eel that I worked on when I was in graduate school. That's my major professor and I up behind UCF. A couple of smaller groups of fish, and then we'll finish up the fish part. These are the lobed fin fish, and I have to go with these because we're going to move on to with legs here in just a moment. One of the lobe fin fish are known as the Sarcopterygii. These are very famous lobe fin fish. They have paired fins with fleshy lobes. If you look in the picture in your upper right, you see the difference between a ray fin fish and a lobe fin fish. Notice in the lobe fin fish, remember in the ray fin, there's no muscles down in the rays, but in the lobe fin fish, there's musculature and bones that are moving down the rays. So the ray is not just appendage hanging off, it's becoming part of the body. Right? There's the shoulder girdle, and there's the core of the bones of the fleshy lobe. Right? And if we look down below those forelimb comparisons, we can see that some of the similar bones are there between the human and the coelacanth. The coelacanth is the organism on the lower left. We thought these things were extinct until the 50s. We only knew them from the fossil record. But they have these lobed fins. And so what we mean by, or what is important or significant about this, is these joints are articulated. So they can move, and they could maybe be more dexterous than just a limb. They could act like a leg eventually. Not too many species of sarcopterygians around. There's only the one or two of the coelacanth and about half a dozen of the lungfish. And the lungfish in the lower right, I'm pointing the arrows to the little appendages that are on the lungfish as well. So, and in the lungfish, I failed to mention at the time when it was on the slide, the lungfish also are called lungfish because they can breathe out of water. So we have fish at this time, the sarcops and the dipnoi, who are developing lobed fins, right? Not legs, but lobed fins, and developing more this idea, this ability to breathe out of water.